Hello, my grots and gits. Welcome back to the channel. This is Happy Krumping Wargaming, where we talk about all things Krumping in the world of Warhammer 40,000. Today, we're talking about the three best matchups for the Orks. This is after the balanced data slate in September, if you guys were wondering. So, if you're watching this in a future timeline and you're like, hey, what was he talking about? So that's what's happening. Okay, so we're super excited about Orks. They're actually in a pretty good position. We basically got no nerfs and more or less no buffs. Maybe we got slight changes, but essentially with the points changes and the rules changes, we had a big side grade. The only really nice thing for us was eliminating towering and eliminating the fact that devastating wounds spilled over. So now that devastating wounds don't spill over, that's a huge boost to the boys. This is so, I guess we did get buffs in the balanced data slate, just not specific to us, but for the game state overall, we got big buffs for our army, so we're happy. Okay, so let's get into this bad boy, and we're going to start with the TLDR here. All right, basically, we're not going to include sisters / admech here. These armies, they're just still bad, and there's no real need to kick a dog when it's down. And we're also going to be talking about the worst matchups in another video, and we'll give you little strategies and thoughts on how to handle those bad matchups. But what are some of the honorable mentions before we get into the top three? Or I'm sorry, let's talk about the general strengths first. I'm getting ahead of myself here. General strengths. All right, we have a very flexible army now. We can build the Orks in a bunch of different ways, and it's really freaking exciting. We can go Horde, we can go Mechanized, we can do an Elite army. There are a vast amount of ways that we can actually build this army to go into our opponents, which is really nice. Makes list building a joy. We have dual activation, and it requires dual activations, and then we also have really tough base units. So what I mean by dual activations, basically, you can have the most powerful unit in the game, or the most shooty unit in the game. Let's call it a Tau Crisis Suit blob, okay? Because that blob will kill anything. And if it wants to kill a massive unit of super buffed up knobs that are inside a truck, it can't, because it's going to put all of its shooting that could potentially do, I don't know, like 100 wounds. It's kind of ridiculous what they can do. And the only thing they can do is they can kill the truck. And then once the truck dies and the knobs get out of it, that crisis suit can't shoot again. So we require dual activations because we have these cheap transports. So you can load all your dudes up to transports, makes the enemy shooting much less efficient into you. It's almost better than being tougher. And then you couple that with the fact that a lot of our base units, all the guys who aren't going in vehicles, are actually very tough. So Squig Hogs are starting at T7. Our Squig Bosses are starting at T10. So it's like we have very tough units just in general. As a matter of fact, a lot of times I'll use one of my Beast Boss on Squigosaurs as bait. I'll put him so that he is visible, so that my opponent will move out into a compromising position to shoot him. Because one, I don't think he's going to kill him when I spend a CP to make him -1 to be wounded. And then two, if he does, it doesn't really alter my game plan, and it puts my opponent in a really bad position, which is pretty sick. All right, 2 or 3, I guess, our units trade really well. So a unit of Beast Snaggers can run in, and they can just slaughter a monolith. So they can trade up really valuably. They can slaughter basically any vehicle you throw them at with that Beast Boss who's just being a total Chad. We have very high OC. Most of our troops are going to be OC2. I mean, you've got some OC1 in there, but our Gretchen, which are costing 40 points for the unit, are OC2. That's wild. So we have actually very high OC on our armies, on our units, which means that we can steal objectives. We probably don't hold objectives that well because it's pretty easy to kill the Orks, but we can steal objectives like champions. We have amazing stratagems. Our stratagem support is incredible. Unbridled Carnage for exploding 5s. We've got -1 to wound. We've got Fight on Death. We've got +2 to advance and charge. We have Careen, which is one of the best stratagems in the game. So a lot of strengths. And then we also have Hilarity in Defeat. Because even when the boys lose, they're winning because the army is freaking awesome. All right. What are our general weaknesses? We are a very low AP army. Like very low AP. Everything is AP1. Very few things get to AP2. And I think we have 2 sources of AP3 in the Codex. Yeah, I think because AP3 would be exclusive to kill saws, which you're never going to take because it's an awful option. And maybe the Gargantuan Squiggoth. We have horrible AP in the army. It's a big weakness. We have generally pretty bad shooting. There are a few exceptions, like Flash Kits are actually objectively a great shooting platform, but once again, they're AP1. So generally bad shooting. And then we have a low resilience after the transports are popped. Once your transports are dead, your units die pretty easy because we have very low armor. So your normal orc boys, they are at a 5-up armor save instead of a 6-up like last edition, so it's maybe slightly better, but you're going to die once you're out of the transport. So then we have a very fairly predictable game plan. It's really not that hard to figure out what the orcs are planning for. You know they're in transports, you know they're driving up the table, and you know they're going to get out and charge you because that's kind of our only options. So it's not that challenging for our opponents to predict what we're going to do. There are some things we can do to offset that. So, like, for example, we can have commandos using Snakerod's ability to teleport. We can have the Weird Boy teleporting a Orc Boy squad. I mean, there's options, but we're pretty predictable. Let's get into the top 3. All right, cool. Honorable mentions. Eldar. All right, guys. Actually, Eldar are not a bad matchup for anymore. As a matter of fact, I think Eldar are a net positive matchup for the Orcs. They really struggle to kill us now. I wouldn't say they're one of our best matchups, but they do struggle to get through us now with the changes to Devastating Wounds. And we just have so many units that can move up the battlefield that, honestly, we can put them in positions where if they want a Phantasm, they're going to move themselves into a bad position. So, it's absolutely an option. GSC, they are... When GSC can now actually potentially die, as opposed to just automatically resurrecting, we can actually start to whittle them down. So you can actually end a game with GSC only having half an army instead of an entire army, which is pretty dang cool. They also get enough points cost reductions that I think the Orcs are sitting quite attractive in this particular matchup. We were already better into GSC than almost everyone else, and now I think it's a net positive matchup for the Orcs, which is cool. And then lastly, Tau, which is a army that I believe is one of the best in the game right now. I think it was already pretty decent, and now it's like, oh my gosh, scary. I don't necessarily want to run into Tau, but the entire army is vehicles, and it gives us the opportunity to make very liberal use of our anti-monster vehicle keywords. So those are our honorable mentions. What is the third best matchup for Orcs? This is actually no a really particular order between the top 3. These are just the matchups that I like. So third best matchup for Orcs, let's call it the Chaos Knights. I would say Imperial Knights are a better matchup, but remember, we're not kicking dogs when they're down, so Imperial Knights are... All right, so Chaos Knights. This is basically out of the armies that are relevant and competitive that I'm kind of talking about. I'm not really talking about the armies that aren't really competitively relevant. All right, so Chaos Knights. A lot of Chaos Knights are actually really pivoting into the Rampager / this Carnivore spam, and that actually is very scary, but it really gets the Orcs where we want to be. Our snaggers get to use that reroll hit rolls so we can fish for the exploding 6s or 5s on our beast bosses, which will then have anti-monster vehicle 4 up, which will then cause dev wounds into these monsters and will just absolutely annihilate. Knobs can run through them. Remember, knobs are always going to be -1 to wound when they're led by a war boss, so the war boss is cheap. Mazrog will eat a baby knight by himself, no problem. The Squig Hogs, oh my gosh, the Squig Hogs just charge straight through and they annihilate. So basically, and the combo for the Squig Hogs, by the way, is you're going to want to run like Edwappa's Kill Choppa on the Smasher Knob, who's leading them, because that gives them +1 to hit, and the Edwappa's Kill Choppa gives them dev wounds. And remember, that Smasher Knob, when he charges, he gets anti-monster vehicle 3 up instead of 4 up, so he will kill a baby knight by himself. It's just a very, very powerful combination, and we have tons of these in the Codex that lets us just annihilate monsters quite well. And Brigands went up, and those are the big shooty boys, and since they went up in cost, your Chaos Knights are much less likely to spam them, and they were the ones that were really scary into Orcs. So we're actually pretty dang happy with the way that we're sitting into Chaos Knights right now. One of the things that you can do is you can just drop your Grots and your trucks in front, so when those carnivores want to charge in, they can only charge your Grots and your trucks, and get wrecked, nerd. So then we do the counter charge and just completely just annihilate. So that's against the Chaos Knights. I think that's a great matchup, and we should be pretty happy when we get to run it. What's the next one? World Eaters and other melee things. So basically, World Eaters are good now because they got the points reductions they needed. A few of their models are still a little overpriced, like their Exalted 8-bound and their normal 8-bound. They need to come down maybe another 5 points. But besides that, World Eaters are actually looking quite good. So I think you're going to start seeing these guys competitively now. So the thing is, Orcs are the top dog when it comes to melee armies. There is an argument where your Black Templars might be a little bit better. Could be. Black Templars kind of hit like Orcs, but they're lower strength. But they are also a lot tougher, like a lot tougher. But Orcs, we have easy access to our -1 to wound. We have high toughness. So all our basic units are going to be at T5 and with -1 to wound. Even the World Eater's elite stuff is going to be running in, never wounding really better than on 4s, which is Super, super nice. And we also have fights on death counters. So you can have Angron charge in into your Beast Snagas, and then your Beast Snagas say, lol, we die, but then we also kill you. Because they're going to hit on 2s, they're going to be re-rolling when they're led by that Beast Boss. The Beast Boss is going to have your anti-monster vehicle 4-up keyword. So we actually have the ability to really do quite a bit. Same with knobs, right? So knobs are natively going to be -1 to wound. They charge in, you can spend your 2 CP to fight on death. It gives us the ability to play against melee armies exceptionally well. Another key part of this particular matchup is going to be our Flash Gitz, because Flash Gitz are nightmares for power armored armies. Because power armored armies are going to be at that 3-up armor save, which basically means our AP1, since they're going to be in cover, they're still saving on 3s, but 1/3 of the time they're going to fail. And Flash Gitz have a crazy volume of shots with those exploding 6s and the full rerolls to hit if you're running Bad Ruck. So Flash Gitz, they are going to run up in the truck. The truck is going to shoot. They get exploding 6s because the gun explodes, not the ability of the unit. They're going to kill. Then the enemy's either going to destroy the truck and the Flash Gitz are going to pop out, or in your turn, you're going to get out, do a normal shooting phase, hitting on 5s, rerolling all hit rolls, exploding on 6s, is going to kill. And then you're also going to get to Overwatch on the next turn. So Flash Gitz will get to activate like 3 times at least, and it's very terrifying for your enemy. So that is the matchup there. And then finally, the last matchup, the matchup that I think is probably the best matchup for the Orks, and a matchup that's really kind of scary for a lot of other enemies, the Tyranids. Orks are the preeminent monster hunters in the game, because there is very little, off the top of my head, I can't even think of any anti-monster keywords that are standard for armies. Maybe you have like an ability, one unit that can do it, or one enhancer that can do it. Orks, as far as I can tell, are really the only anti-vehicle/monster keyword that's standard in the game. So we actually run through these big nasties. Our Beast Snagas run through our Snaga bosses, our Squigosaur bosses can actually do quite good into these these monsters. Our Squighog boys just run through them like we spoke about earlier. But at the same time, all of those units, except for the Squigosaur boss, still clear hordes at the same time very, very well, because they're all going to be hitting on 2s or 3s, generally winning on 2s. They're just going to mow through hordes. So we can pivot very easily with the same list into killing hordes and killing monsters and vehicles. And this is a nightmare for Tyranids. Not to mention that we couple that with the fact that we have high OC. And that is one of Tyranids' greatest strengths. So they have extremely high OC, and they just like to gum up objectives with these massive bodies of Gaunts that are all OC too. Well, one of our normal units of like Snagas, or heck, even just boys, will run through, kill one of those blobs, all be at OC2, and steal the objective back. So it gives us a lot of play into Tyranids, and it's one of, I think it's a nightmare matchup for Tyranids. They can still win. I'm not saying they can't, but this is probably the ideal matchup for Orks as far as the 41st millennia is concerned. Remake the Octarius War, everybody. Okay, so this was the list. So we are really excited and happy to play against our Chaos Knights, our other melee armies, typically that World Eater style. Dark Angels might be a little tougher because I don't think we can kill their Night Brick, but who cares? You just play around it. And then we have Tyranids. Those are our great matchups. Then we have a few honorable mentions. Going to be your Eldar GSC Tau. I don't think those are necessarily great matchups, but they are matchups that we do better than many people might expect us into. So stay tuned, gentlemen, and all my grots and gets. Stay tuned, because we'll be back and we'll be talking about the worst matchups for Orks and how to potentially counter those matchups. And then we're going to be back. We're going to do the same thing for Custodes and some other armies as well. So thank you all for your attention. If you want to support the channel, please hit a like and subscribe. I also have a link down to my Ko-fi, which is where you can financially support me if that is, if you do want this content to continue coming, because that is the way that I'm going to keep this content coming. This does take quite a bit of time, so any financial support is greatly appreciated. Love you all, and I hope you have an amazing freaking day. Happy Krumping!